Hello viewers, in today's lecture we will discuss about the population and issues concerning youth. Under your shoulders, dear young people of the entire world, weigh the responsibility to transform tomorrow's world into a society where peace, harmony and fraternity reign. Bishop Carlos Bello. Our world is home to 1.8 billion young people between the ages of 10 and 24. A swell in the global population of young people has the potential to transform economies for better or worse, depending on the decision of today's policymakers. The concept of youth. Youth is better understood as a period of transition from the dependence of childhood to adulthood's independence. That's why, as a category, youth is more fluid than other fixed age groups. The United Nations for statistical purposes defines youth as those persons between the ages of 15 and 24 years, without prejudice to other definitions by member states. The Table 1 depicts the conceptualization of the concept of youth. Different organizations have defined this term differently. The UN Secretariat, UNESCO and ILO define it as people in the age group of 15 to 24 years. However, the UN Habitat Youth Fund have increased this youth age range and define it as people in the age group of 15 to 32 years. UNICEF, WHO, UNFPA have given clear-cut age demarcations for adolescents, young people and youth. Adolescents are placed in the age range of 10 to 19 years. Young people are in the age range 10 to 24, while youth are placed in the age range of 15 to 24 years. UNICEF, the Convention on the Rights of Child, has defined the people of age 18 years or below as a child only. The African Youth Charter has defined youth as the section of people in the age group of 15 to 35 years. Trends in the youth population. Today's generation of young people numbers slightly less than 1.8 billion in a world population of 7.3 billion. That's up from 721 million people aged 10 to 24 in 1950, when the world's population totaled 2.5 billion. The highest proportion of young people today is in poor countries, where barriers to their development and fulfillment of their potential are the highest. About 89% of the world's 10 to 24-year-olds, almost 9 out of 10, live in less developed countries. That percentage is even higher among the youngest in this age range. There were 1.2 billion youth, 15 to 25 years globally in 2015, accounting for 1 out of every 6 people worldwide. By 2030, the target date for the Sustainable Development Goals, the number of youth is projected to have grown by 7% to nearly 1.3 billion. In Latin America and the Caribbean, Europe, Northern America and Oceania, youth populations have stabilized in size and are projected to change little over the coming decades. By contrast, Asia and Africa are in the midst of substantial changes in the size of their youth populations. After rapid and sustained growth through the latter half of the 20th century, the number of young people aged 15 to 24 in Asia is projected to decline from 718 million in 2015 to 711 million in 2030 and 619 million in 2060. International migrants aged 10 to 24 constituted just over 12% of the world's total 232 million international migrants in 2013, according to the United Nations. More such migrants moved from one developing country to another. While the flow of young people rarely alters the age structure or slows the growth of population significantly in migrant-sending countries, over time it affects population dynamics in some developed countries that receive large numbers of migrants. Globally, males outnumber females among people aged 12 to 24, with 106 males for every 100 females. The proportion of males is lowest in Africa and in Latin America and Caribbean at 102 and highest in Asia and the Pacific at 109. In developed countries, the proportion of males among young people is 105. The diagram shows graphically the youth population across different world regions and projections up to 2060. The curves are clearly shown in different colors for different regions. The yellow and the red curves are the most distinctive in the figure. Asia, to start with, had a little less than 300 million youth in 1950 and reaches a peak level somewhere near 2010, where the number of youth is almost touching 800 million. It is projected to be around 600 million in 2060. Also for Africa, the curve shows a consistent upward trajectory. The number of youth was around 50 million in 1950. Thereafter, this number has increased and is projected to be around 500 million in 2060. For the other regions, the curves show that the number of youth was less than 100 million for all the regions and are projected to remain at about the same levels at which they started back in 1950. Challenges facing the youth. Youth today face a number of challenges. These are discussed below. Involvement of youth in conflicts. Involvement of youth in armed conflict is due to the fact that youth are passive victims in war. However, it has been noted that some of the youth, especially males, are a threat to world peace. Involvement of young people in armed conflict is usually caused by poverty, lack of education and employment opportunities, seeking for protection, lack of political participation and peer pressure. Education crisis among youth. The educational crisis among youth has been provoked by several sub-crises like low enrollment rate in primary and secondary education, poor education quality, issues of gender imparity that are related to educational access, and cases of neglected informal education programs over formal education. Impacts of these sub-crises on youth include unemployment, underemployment, health issues, low growth in nation's economy, and they are barriers in promoting women's rights, self-expression, and civic engagement. Good education unleashes potential, but with the absence of it, many opportunities that young people would have benefited from will be foregone. Sexual abuse and HIV/AIDS. Youth have been hardly hit by this pandemic, with 40% of new infections occurring among young people 15 to 25 years old in 2009. These high infection rates are mostly rooted on women and young children due to sexual abuse. The root cause of HIV/AIDS spread among youth is lack of knowledge about the disease, and on the other hand, it is their ignorance. Those who lack knowledge are mostly from developing countries, sub-Saharan region more especially, where numbers of infections are really high as compared to other regions. Juvenile delinquency. Juvenile delinquence comprises mostly of youth, with youth making the high numbers of arrests than the population we consider as children in this context. Statistics show that a large percentage of the youth that age out of juvenile justice systems tend to end up homeless because they are unprepared to live independently. They have limited education and have no social support. Disability among youth is on rise. The number of disabled youth has been increasing gradually and has thus resulted in heightened concern in relation to their rights and well-being. 3 to 500 million people worldwide live with a disability of some kind. Many youth living with disability encounter issues such as prejudice, social isolation, and discrimination from members of their respective societies. lack of access to information and communication technology. Even with its rapid growth, some regions in the world still lack access to information and communication technology, with South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa with the least user statistics. This is due to the fact that countries in these regions are mostly developing countries, and the cost of using this technology is hefty on them. Although a lot of good comes out of their use, disadvantages are still present when it comes to ICT, mostly due to internet crimes committed throughout the world. Poverty and hunger. Youth who endure growing up in a poverty-ridden communities are usually prone to suffer from social discrimination and exclusion, which affects their emotional well-being. There are more social links linked to poverty, like teenage pregnancy and childbearing, which is more prominent in poorer communities than in wealthy communities. The same goes for child marriages and HIV knowledge among youth. Statistics show that the number of girls being married before the age of 18 is higher in the poorest regions of the world, particularly Eastern Africa, Western Africa, and South Central Asia. Prevalence of drug abuse. Consumption of drugs is said to be abusive if users use them for recreational motives rather than for their medical benefits. Drugs that are consumed for recreational reasons contain psychoactive substances which stimulate feelings and give pleasure or excitement. Statistics show that a large number of youth are involved in this illicit abuse of substances. In 2010 alone, around 210 million people, youth inclusive, were predicted to take illicit substances at least once. Youth are at both ends of the drug trade. They are involved from the manufacturing to the consumption, their main positions being traffickers, dealers, and consumers. Undesirable leisure time activities. In order to promote youth engagement in productive leisure activities, it is important to first conduct a detailed analysis to understand how youth nowadays spend their leisure time. The right leisure programs eliminate social ills such as juvenile delinquency, drug abuse, and other unpleasant behaviors. An engagement of youth in the right leisure activity appears to be higher in developed countries compared to developing countries. Lack of resources like libraries and sport facilities attributes to the lack of leisure activities in developing and undeveloped countries. Health issues. The majority of youth have health issues that arise from bad habits and poor hygiene, persistent behavioral risks, poor basic sanitation, and new and emerging diseases. All these contribute to a deadly mix that is changing the classic picture of healthy youth. Other factors that contribute to youth health issues include accidents and injuries, including those caused by insecurity, war, and occupation. In all countries, whether developing, transitional, or developed, disabilities and acute and chronic illnesses are often induced or compounded by economic hardship, unemployment, sanctions, embargoes, poverty, or poorly distributed wealth. Female youth face bigger challenges. Young women and girls between 15 and 25 years of age face special challenges in many developing countries. As a whole, females receive less education than their male counterparts, marry and become parents earlier, have fewer economic opportunities, heavy household responsibilities, and are often constrained by traditions and customs that do not apply to their male counterparts. It is estimated that 33 to 66% of sexual assaults worldwide are perpetrated against girls of age 15 or younger. Millions, especially girls, still lack access to high-quality education. Despite all the research, showing the health and other benefits of attending and staying in school, the number of children out of primary school in 2011 was still 57 million. Most of these children are never expected to enroll. Lack of decent work opportunities. Good jobs are still out of reach for young people poised to enter the labor force. The ability of young people to get decent work, critical on so many levels, underlies their ability to achieve their sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. Yet, young people in many countries still do not have access to a good job or hope for a useful livelihood. What the International Labour Organization terms a global youth employment crisis is worsening. In the world's least developed countries, every year, about 15 million young people enter a labor force in which the large majority of workers suffer from unemployment, underemployment, or vulnerable employment. Large-scale exclusion, marginalization, and discrimination. In many countries and many contexts, parents, families, and communities do not respect the emerging autonomy of young people, adolescents in particular. Young people are generally excluded from decision making about the types of programs and policies that might be best to meet their needs. Lack of enjoyment of universal human rights. The human rights that everyone is born with underpin young people's realization of their sexual reproductive health and reproductive rights. In its 2012 resolution on adolescence and youth, the Commission on Population and Development of the United Nations urged government to protect the human rights of adolescents and youth to have control over and decide freely and responsibly on matters related to their sexuality, including sexual and reproductive health, free of coercion, discrimination and violence, and regardless of age and marital status. Lack of access to sexual and reproductive health information and services. Access to appropriate health information and services is at the core of the ability of young men and women to realize their sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. Tragically, despite all the recent attention to their needs, most adolescents and young people are still not getting what they need in the way of information and services. Social, economic, and legal obstacles. The yawning gap between what young people need as a basis for a safe and successful transition to adulthood and what they are getting reflects strong and persistent underplaying social, economic, and legal obstacles. Some of these barriers affect people of all ages, while others are specific to young people. All contribute to denying young people the fullest enjoyment of their sexual and reproductive health and reproductive rights. Importance of youth population. Many of the countries with the largest portions of youth today are among the poorest in the world, but they are also on the cusp of demographic transition that can yield a demographic dividend. Transition begins as fertility and mortality rates start to fall, leaving fewer dependents. More people proportionally are in the workforce. The dividend comes as resources are freed for economic development and for greater per capita spending on higher quality health, education, services. Economic growth takes off. A virtuous cycle begins where capability and opportunities continuously expand. More than any other group, today's young women and men will impact how people in rich and poor countries live in the 21st century. Unfortunately, hundreds of millions of youth, especially young women, lack education, skills and job training, employment opportunities and health services, effectively limiting their future at a very early age. As a result, youth may react by unleashing risky or harmful behavior against themselves or society. Although youth may often be perceived as contributing to society's problems, they are in fact important assets for the economic, political, and social life of their communities. Addressing key global threats like the spread of HIV/AIDS, growing poverty, and political instability in developing countries depends on protecting the rights of youth and providing them with the support they need to contribute to the health and well-being of society. Globalization, technological advances, and the spread of social networking offer new opportunities for youth to connect and become more active participants in development, while at the same time making their lives more complex and challenging. This youthful demographic landscape must be a central part of any development policy, one designed to integrate young people more fully in political, economic, and social life and enable them to share in the benefits of development. Throughout history, young people have actively sought to bring social, political, and economic change to their countries. In so doing, they are sometimes credited with changing business as usual. Often, they are portrayed as rebellious, destructive, reckless, or violent. However, young people are today's and tomorrow's wage earners and entrepreneurs, educators and innovators, health professionals, political and civic leaders, vital to economic growth and well-being. This is because of many reasons. Youth are better able to access economic and social opportunities, share in economic growth, live healthy lives, and contribute to household, community, and national well-being. Youth fully participate in democratic and development processes, play active roles in peace building and civil society, and are less involved in youth gangs, criminal networks, and insurgent organizations. Youth have a stronger voice in and are better served by local and national institutions with more robust and youth-friendly policies. Development can be accelerated when the majority of youth in any country are able to make significant contributions to economic, social, and political life in a way that lifts countries out of poverty, ensures greater stability, and promotes healthier societies. Alternatively, peace, progress, and prosperity are held back when countries are unable to meet the basic needs of their youth. With few exceptions, in the coming decades, developing countries have or will have a population age structure that favors economic growth. For some countries, the window to capitalize on this opportunity is short, while for others it is just opening or still a few decades away. Conclusion. Young people matter. They matter because they have inherent human rights that must be upheld. They matter because an unprecedented 1.8 billion youth are alive today, and because they are the shapers and leaders of our global future. Yet, in a world of adult concerns, young people are often overlooked. This tendency cries out for urgent correction because it imperils youth as well as economies and societies at large. This is all for today's lecture. Thank you. Next time we will meet again to discuss another interesting topic. Till then, goodbye and take care.